What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, just want to remind you guys that if you're a fan of Too Raw for TV, as far as being unfiltered, uncensored, then you might want to consider signing up to the Patreon. All right, YouTube is cracking down on smaller content creators, especially. They want us to talk like we're kindergartners, talking code, and we don't have to always curse, but I know that people have, some people are more into a more explosive, more no holds bar style when it comes to sports talk or just talk in general. So, if you're a fan of that, you might want to consider joining the Patreon. It's only $2 per month as far as the basic tier. In that tier, I talk about social issues, political commentary, things of that nature. The $5 tier is for those who really want to hear about sports. And then I talk about the media, LeBron James, Clutch, the NBA, all of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Things that I can't really talk about like I want to on here. All right. So those of you who are interested in signing to the Patreon, there's a link in the description box and a link in the pinned comment in the comment section below. So this is a requested video from my subscribers. They want me to do a comparison between Paul Silas and Mike Fratello as head coaches in the NBA. These are two grand old men of basketball. Unfortunately, we lost Paul Silas back on December the 10th, 2022. He was 79 years old. Mike Fratello, fortunately, is still with us. He is currently 77 years old. Paul Silas, let's start with him. Paul Silas had a very good career. It was actually, considering how the bar has been lowered today, it was a borderline Hall of Fame caliber career. I believe Paul Silas won 2 championships, I believe. I think he won one with the Celtics in 1974, and I think he won one. Let me think about that. Did he win another one? Oh yeah. He won one as a role player with the Sonics in 1979. I think he retired after that season too. He was after that season, or he retired a couple years later. But anyway, Paul Silas was a tough, no holds barred type player. Not a mean guy, but he was tough. He didn't take any crap. As a head coach, he emphasized discipline. He thought his players should be disciplined. He didn't like froth. He also had a penchant as a head coach for discipline. He worked a lot more on, while he was a guy that did the X's and O's, he was more of a guy who worked more on players and relationships and personalities and how to mesh as a unit from a psychological and personality standpoint. He thought that was a very important aspect of the game. He also preached teamwork, which it makes sense that he struggled with LeBron James. And he was LeBron James' first coach, and he wanted LeBron James to play the power forward position and how to play in the post. LeBron was opposed to that, and he also struggled, Paul Silas, he struggled getting along with Eric Snow. And I'll talk about that a little later on. Now, Paul Silas didn't have the greatest overall record, but I can make some, I can kind of explain why his record win percentage is a little bit misleading. Paul Silas coached the then San Diego Clippers from 1980 to 1983. He then coached the Charlotte Hornets. He started off as a replacement to, I believe, Dave Cowens during the 98-99 season. Really 99 season. And he coached all the way to 2003, excuse me. And he was abruptly fired after the 2002-2003 season. And then, like I said, he was LeBron James' first head coach, but he was fired late during the 2004-2005 season. And his last coaching job was with the Charlotte Bobcats, which of course are now the Charlotte Hornets. And he coached them 2010, 2011, and 2011, 2012. And he did not return as head coach. I think he pretty much retired from the NBA after that. Winning percentage of 387 victories. He had a losing record, of 387 victories versus 488 defeats for a 44.2% win percentage. And the playoffs, well, he only coached 29 games in the playoffs. He went to the playoffs just 4 different occasions. And didn't do particularly well either one of them. The best he did was back-to-back conference finals appearances in 2001 and 2002 with the Charlotte Hornets. In the postseason, he went 13-16 for a 44.8% win percentage. Now, part of the reason why Paul Silas had a losing record was because with San Diego, they were a mess. You may recall, this is the team that Bill Walton played on before he joined the Boston Celtics, and he was scarcely available with the Clippers. This is when I think Bill Walton was barely there. He was almost always hurt, not to mention they had other injuries on that roster. So that hurt Paul Silas in those years in San Diego. That hurt his overall record. He would not coach again until he replaced Dave Cowens during the 98-99 season. And that's probably the most successful tenure he's had as a head coach, is with the Charlotte Hornets. As I said, he coached them from 98 to 2003. That last year they had moved to New Orleans. And during that stint, he went to the playoffs 4 consecutive years. So that was his most successful stint as a head coach. And then, like I said before, he was LeBron James' first head coach. Missed the playoffs his first year. When he was fired, it was at the behest of LeBron James for the most part. But they were 34-30 when he was fired. And then after he was fired, the Cavaliers had a mini collapse and they missed the playoffs. So, I think they were 34-30 when he was fired. And the rest of the way, they went 8-12, I believe it was. They went 8-12. So they collapsed after firing him, and they missed the playoffs. Now with Charlotte, of course, considering the lack of talent that was on that team his first year compared to the rest of the NBA, he did very well his first year. But the second year, it was an abomination, a complete and total abomination with the Charlotte. I think were they still the Bobcats then? Yeah, they were still the Bobcats. And they had the worst winning percentage in NBA history, only a 106 winning percentage. And just awful. Just awful. And like I said, the team really wasn't that talented overall. But, that's something that hurt Paul Silas too. A lot of those years, the teams that he coached just were not very talented. I'm looking at this roster now. Bismack Biyombo, Derek Brown, Matt Carroll, Sagana Diop, Gerald Henderson, Corey Higgins. And Corey Maggette was good, but he was getting older. Jamario Moon, haven't heard that name in a while. Byron Mullins, Eduardo Nahara, Tyrus Thomas, Kemba Walker, young Kemba Walker, DJ White, Reggie Williams. See, that roster sucked overall. So, look, despite the winning record, Paul Silas, I think, overachieved with the rosters that he had. You could generally say that. And he was, for the most part, loved and respected by his teams and his players. And his presence is missed today. As a matter of fact, a lot of people still don't understand why he was fired after the 2002-2003 season. They don't understand. They did well. Maybe his personality just clashed with someone in the front office. I don't know. Mike Fratello is considered one of the top X's and O's guys. You know, he is an X's and O's guy, strategic guy. He's a basketball savant. Mike Fratello was all about detail, and he was one of those micromanager type head coaches. Okay. Sometimes that can get on your nerves, or sometimes if you're a basketball wonk, that could be something that's appealing. He also was a strategist in that he would look at the rosters that he had and would determine what was the team's strengths and weaknesses. That's partially why when he coached the Cavaliers in the mid to late 90s, those Cavalier teams, which were the direct opposite of the teams that Mike D'Antoni had with the 7 seconds or less, he recognized that he didn't have, with those Cavalier teams, great athletes, great speed. He noticed that team would struggle as far as pushing the pace, but that team was great as far as in the half-court situation. I noticed that also that team, they worked the shot clock. And they were a good defensive team, but they didn't have great one-on-one scores. I'm talking about those Cavalier teams in the mid to late 90s, before Sean Kemp got there. They didn't have great one-on-one scores. So as a consequence, they worked the shot clock. They tried to get the best shot. And that was those Cavalier teams that were only averaging like 88, 90 points a game. You know what I'm saying? I think Terrell Brandon was the point guard. They had Bobby Fields on those teams. Dan Marley was there one year, I think 95, 96. Junior Zagauskas was a young player on those teams. Those were those Mike Fratello teams. I think Chris Mills is on that team too. Mike Fratello started off coaching in college. His first coaching gig was as an interim head coach of the Atlanta Hawks back in the early 80s. This is one back when they had Dan Roundfeld, Fast Eddie Johnson, a young Tree Rollins, John Drew, those teams. He came back a couple of years later. I think he was an assistant with the Hawks for a couple of years, and then he became the head coach full time. And that was the peak, maybe, perhaps, of Mike Fratello's coaching career, coaching those Dominique Wilkins, Atlanta Hawks teams, where I think they went to the conference finals like 3 or 4 years in a row. One of the top teams in the East in the 1980s. They probably peaked in 1988. Then Mike Fratello, I can't remember whether I'm trying to see if I can find out. I think he resigned as head coach and then went into broadcasting for a couple of years on NBC. And then he replaced Lenny Wilkins as head coach of those Cavalier teams I talked about. And they had some success. definite success. Went to the playoffs. We're not a championship team, obviously. Then he left. Matter of fact, no, I think he might have been fired. See if I can look at some of these details here. No, I think he stepped down and took a 5-year break or so, and then went to coach the Memphis Grizzlies for a couple of years. And he might have taken over for Huey Brown, or did Huey Brown take over for him? One or two. But anyway, he had some success with the Memphis Grizzlies. He went to the playoffs 2 years in a row. He didn't have a lot of talent, obviously, but he went to the playoffs a couple years in a row. But then the bottom fell out in 2006, 2007. After a 6-24 start, he was fired. And since then, Mike Fratello has been pretty much in broadcasting. You know, whether it's ESPN or what have you. His coaching career record was 667 and 548. Won nearly 55% of his contests. Terrible playoff record. 62 games coached, but only a 20-42 record for a 32.3% win percentage. Now, part of that, I think, is because of the fact that they were often overmatched in the postseason. Whether it was the Milwaukee Bucks of the 80s they were playing against, or Larry Bird's Celtics, or Jordan's Bulls, or Ewing's Knicks. They were often overmatched. And the roster that he was coaching just couldn't compete with the team that they were going up against. And hence, you know, the team had limitations, but he would try to maximize those rosters despite limitations. I think both these guys are winners, but I guess you have to go with Mike Fratello because he was just more successful. Neither one of these guys won championships. Neither one of these guys went to an NBA Finals. Mike Fratello was named, I believe, the head coach in the NBA for, I want to say, sometime in the 95 and 96 seasons, he was head coach of the month. So let's see. Let's look at their coaching resumes. Well, with Paul Silas, I don't really see much. Just his record. So, Mike Fratello was NBA Coach of the Year in 1985-86. That's something I totally forgot about. He did win NBA Head Coach of the Year one season, 85-86 with the Atlanta Hawks. I believe that's the year they went 57-25, or one of the years they went 57-25. He was All-Star Game Head Coach in 1988, and he won a Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award back in 2022. So, yeah, accolades, win records wise, even though he was being eliminated in the playoffs, yeah, I would go with Mike Fratello. Gotta give Mike Fratello the edge over Paul Silas. But anyway, tell me what you guys think.